This is Robert Clotworthy, and you are listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Here are your hosts, James McQuiston, Oak Island theorist and author, along with John Hamels, PhD and historical researcher. Get the whole story right here, brought to you by Rabbit Hole Investigations.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Oak Island Plus. I'm Doc Hamels and
Jim McQuiston.
Jim, what's the topic this week?
We have an interview with Scott Wolter.
Scott Wolter of America Unearthed?
Yep.
The one and the same. Wow.
Yep. He's an opinionated person and somewhat controversial at times, but he sticks to his guns, and we thought it was well worth having him on the show to ask him some questions.
From what I've read, he's been pretty involved with the Oak Island story, so
yes.
I'll be really interested to see what he has to say. He just come out with a new book. It's called Oak Island, the Templars and the Holy Grail. So it sounds like he's trying to mesh some things together that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Do you want to report any stats before we get?
Well, the stats are pretty impressive, and maybe people don't realize this, but YouTube calculates our views every day, really. And Jim, I know it seems hard to believe, but out there in the world, 59,000 times someone has seen your face.
Oh, boy. Poor people.
Yeah. So anyways, we're doing great. And I suspect after this interview, we may get up to a couple more.
Oh, yeah. Probably 5,000. So one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to Scott is about the so-called Zena map. And here I'm going to put it on the screen right here. Now, even the folks on Oak Island have used terms like if it's real, if it's authentic,
right,
things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are three principal reasons why people question it. The first one is that a lot of the French articles like la or law, which are like the male and female,
mm-hmm,
are used incorrectly on the words. So that means that whoever wrote it was not terribly fluent in French.
I had 3 years of French and 5 years of Latin, and when I looked at that, that's the first thing that jumped out at me, that it was incorrect.
And the other thing is that there's supposedly a date of 1347 on the map. Well, the way it's written in French, and I'm not real good at writing or reading French, although I took 2 years, it starts out with the preface of un, which is typically one.
Right.
But that's not how they wrote 1,347 back then. They left that off. It just started with mil, which would mean 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a Frenchman did not write that. And if it were a date, it would have the anno,
Right,
or
which
the
means
year
year
of
of
our
the
Lord,
Lord,
in front of it, and it doesn't have that. The third reason, which is really interesting, is that if the map was from 1347, it uses the word Indian, right at the very bottom. If you look right center bottom, that spells a little funny, D-I-E-N, but that word wasn't coined until 1492. So like 150 years later or whatever. So the point is that the map can't be what it's purported to be on the surface, but that doesn't mean there's not a reason for the map.
Right.
And so that's what, one of the reasons we wanted to talk to Scott was what his take on that is.
I think he has some strong feelings on that.
But also the Cremona Documents, which
mm-hmm,
are quite a big deal. And also it gets into some Scottish elite family information that Doc found out matches a lot of ours.
Sinclair Weems line. Mm-hmm.
So we figured we'd pick his brain, particularly on those three things and anything else he wanted to talk to us about.
Great. Well, we're going to go to the interview right now. So are we ready?
I'm ready.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey, we're here today. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great, Jim and Doc. Hope you guys are doing well. I'm excited for this interview. I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Well, we are.
Scott, welcome to Oak Island Plus. Go ahead, Jim.
We've already spilled the beans a little bit to the viewer in our intro. particularly showed them what we're going to call the Oak Island map, and we know that there are questions about it, and so that's one of the things we're hoping that we know you have an entirely new perspective on it, but I think Doc wants to lead in with some background on you. And
Okay.
Absolutely.
Like
So, Scott, just give us the thumbnail, elevators talk about who we are for our viewers, because
Sure.
people are watching us all over the world.
Okay. Well, my name is Scott Wolter, and I pretty much born and raised in Minnesota, graduated from UMD up in Duluth, graduated with a degree in geology. I founded a company in 1990 called American Petrographic Services, which is a material forensics laboratory. Basically, we do autopsies on concrete and rock, primarily in the construction industry, but once in a while we'll get involved in some odd projects. We looked at all the fire damage concrete at the Pentagon after 9/11. We've worked on murder cases, all kinds of crazy things, but probably the single most interesting and crazy thing that I've looked at in the laboratory was something called the Kensington runestone, which is a highly controversial artifact found in Minnesota in 1898, the long inscription carved in Scandinavian runes, and its authenticity has been debated ever since. I was hired in July of 2000 to perform a forensic analysis trying to determine the age of the weathering of the inscription. And I was able to do that by comparing the weathering of tombstones with like mineralogy, same mineral grain size, same weathering environment. And I was able to conclude that the weathering of the inscription is older than 200 years. And that's from 1898 because it hasn't been in a weathering environment since. So therefore, it is impossible to be a late 19th century hoax. Therefore, it must be genuine. That's when all the problems started for me. But that started me on a whole different journey to try to figure out who carved this mysterious stone, where did they come from, and why did they come to the center of the continent and place this land claim stone. And over the course of the last 24 years, I think I have been able to answer those questions. And this research has gone in many different directions, but most recently here last year, a bunch of documents came forward that told us pretty much the whole story about what happened on Oak Island that was consistent with what we thought we already knew, but the level of detail is just incredible. So how's that?
sounds good.
Great. Scott, our research shows an unbroken line of certain high-ranking members of the Scottish elite whose ancestors were involved with the Templars, then into Jim's research, the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, and then Freemasons. Unbroken line. Okay, are you guys seeing the same thing?
You're right about that. The only thing is, when you talk about the Templars, I'm a Templar. I'm a member of 3 different orders, some Masonic, some non-Masonic. And what people don't understand, and let's go back, this definitely starts with the Templars, okay? The Curse of Oak Island, or the Oak Island mystery, is absolutely part of the Templar story. And it would be the post-Templar, post-put-down Knights Templar, because the tradition continued. A lot of people want to say that the Templars ended in 1307 when they were suppressed by the Roman Catholic Church and the King of France, and that's just not true at all. The tradition went underground, it continued, and actually, in many ways, you could say thrived. And essentially what happened is those treasures that disappeared in 1307 were brought to Scotland and eventually to the Western lands, which is North America, and they were hidden in multiple places, including Oak Island, for someday. The mission was called the Covenant, which was to establish a sanctuary where people could live free from the tyranny of the monarchs of Europe, free from the persecution of the Roman Church. That sanctuary eventually became the United States of America. The founding fathers, as you said, were absolutely part of this lineage. They were 53 of the 56 signers of the Declaration were Master Masons. Most people don't
Right.
know that. They were also Knights Templar. They just didn't tell anyone. And so they were the ones that recovered those treasures, and they used the primarily the currency, the gold and the silver, to help fund the revolution. And this is a story that's important to come out because the 250th anniversary is coming up, in 2 years. So I think it's time that the world knew the true story. And as a Freemason, as a Knights Templar, I find what's happening in this country and in this world, I should say in the United States, very disturbing. And I think, we have a lot to be proud of. We have a lot to be thankful for, but we also need to understand where we came from. And you know that old phrase, guys, those who do not learn from the past are destined to repeat it. And that's what
Right.
we're doing right now. And so it's important that we talk about these things. It's important we understand the history. It's important that we get it right so that we can go forward intelligently and keep this wonderful sanctuary that, the ideological and biological descendants of the Templars, including these prominent Scottish clans that you're talking about,
Right.
founded. And it's something we need to honor and protect. So,
Well, along the lines of it remaining in existence, the a lot of the Templar treasures were officially turned over to the Knights Hospitaller, or what became the Knights of Malta. But when they were recording various possessions and land holdings, they still separated them into two. Even into the 1500s, they would separate the land as Templar land and the other land as Knights of Malta land. So that legacy, and that's part of my whole writing and our more recent shows, is that legacy continued regardless of the year 1312 or 1307. The legacy was still there. And
of course,
what do you think about that map? I mean,
which one you talking about? The one that of Oak Island, and it's got,
starts with a Z.
yeah, the French text, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? Let's take care of the elephant in the room here, right from the get go. Zena Halpern was a very close friend of mine. I knew her for about 20 years. We were both members of the New England Antiquities Research Association. And, I will say this, Zena was a wonderful person. She was very passionate. She was very intelligent. She was also very stubborn. And, what happened between her and Don Rue was really unfortunate. And I think there were a lot of things that were going on. She, obviously, they signed an agreement to work together in 2010 and write this book together. And we were all working together during that time. But it was convenient for them because they lived close to each other, to do this project together. And I was doing TV and all this other stuff. So, they went on, and, and unfortunately at one point, I think Zena, well, I know what happened. She decided that she didn't need Don anymore. And she took the map and other materials and approached the brothers, who, of course, were more than happy to accept, the material that she had. But you got to go back and look at the first map that Zena brought to the brothers. And that's the one that I call the Nova Scotia map, which is the first map in the Cremona document material that has a reference to Oak Island. And it shows an intersection of longitude and latitude at that very spot. Doesn't say anything about it, at least not on the map. Now, what most people don't know, but there are notes that go with that map. And those notes came to us in 2019. And this was shortly after Zena and Don had parted. And so, and we can talk about where the map came from. But the point is, Zena had no right to take that material to the brothers. The brothers have been contacted. The network's been contacted. Prometheus has been contacted. And we asked them politely when I say we, I'm talking about Don Rue and myself, politely to return that material, and they have not done that. Sadly, Zena passed away shortly after, she and Don split apart. But as you know, I sent you a document that talks about the fallout. For me personally,
Yeah, that letter is amazing.
yeah, it's no BS. Dan Spartan was the one that founded Spartan Enterprises, and that company that Don worked for and Bill Jackson worked for. And as you read in the letter, he was not happy about what happened between Don and Zena, and he puts the blame solely on Zena, but I put the blame partially on the television show. They driven largely because of those two maps, and it's really a difficult situation, but it is what it is. Zena was a good friend. She made a mistake, and it's going to haunt her legacy for going forward. It's just a shame.
Scott, moving along, you've got a new book out with Don Rue called
Yeah.
Oak Island Knights Templar and the Holy Grail. And I've been reading it, and I don't believe anything until I prove it myself. Jim's the same way. We try to do primary sources to all our research. And I want you to know, I took the genealogy of the Weems family against our database. And the good news is, with very little exception, it's all true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that it's true because I vetted that material myself. And
what I mean is that we have an even more in-depth stuff that goes with it.
yeah,
and
right.
We're showing grandmasters and masons and knights baronets, and they're all connected to the Sinclair Weems family tree. So I just wanted you to know we get it.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's always good to have outside independent people confirming things that that you're out there talking about. And it's really a fascinating story because the book I'm working on now is about the Sinclair Weems journals, and I'm on the last chapter, and that last chapter is called Analysis. And so what I'm doing is I'm presenting what I believe to be the supporting evidence that breathes authenticity into these documents. And I believe at this point, I'm thinking about my final comments that I'm going to put in the book. And while I can't say with absolute 100% certainty that that these that these journals are legitimate, I would say that with reasonable certainty, I can say that they are. And I give my reasons for that, but there's still some work to be done. I will say that there have been a couple of times, and they're in the book, where we were given information and we followed up on it, and it led us to places and we found something. Now, again, I have not told anyone about this stuff yet. This is coming in the next books, but these are the kind of things that help prove veracity of documents. And it's taken 9 years to get to this point where I'm ready to publish something. So, but it'd be great to see some of the corroborating information that you guys have. I think you can take what we have already in the Oak Island book and put something together with your own research on these two.
Well, we actually have a quick slide here that we'll just put it up on the screen for the viewer right now. But your documents are called the Cremona document, and we've been working on the Knights of Malta, and the Cremona family is one of the principal families of Malta. They the Grand Master of the Knights of Malta, one of them actually wrote the Constitution for Malta, etc. But as to more to what Doc was talking about, we put this group of elite conspirators together, and they included Sinclairs and Weemuses, or Weems, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
That's in yours. And then they also became Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, along with a number of other people. And you have it linking to Freemasonry. And we found 3 Knights Baronet for Sinclairs and 1 for Weems. But we found 3 Sinclair and 3 Weems that were Grand Masters of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. So, by the way, 91 out of 101 Grand Masters through the years have been from Knights Baronet families. So this whole thing ties together. And Doc was the one that spotted this, like he's reading in your book. I'll take it off the screen now. But Doc noticed, wow, he's talking about some of the same guys we've been talking about. So we did this other little exercise, which I just did the other day and sent it to you. But you had quotes from James Weems and then David Weems, and I worked them into a timeline, which I'll put up right now. And so we're not going to go through the whole thing, but Alexander's connection to the island started, well, it's not an island, province, in 21, and I list all the items. Well, here right in the middle of it is a letter from James Weems that ties right into the story. From my last date was 1625. You provide 1626. I provided 1628, and you provided a second one from 1628. Their boats went there in March of 1628. Your guy writes that they took it there, or they were there by July of 1628. So it just carries on. So this timeline, I'll get it off screen here, but this timeline between your work and our work is just filling in gaps like crazy. And they're documented stuff. All that I've gotten in there and we've gotten in there is all documented, and what you have is documented. So, for anybody that's sitting back going, this didn't happen, they're nuts.
Yeah.
There's no other way to say it.
Well, let's put it this way. There is so much to this story. And let me just back up for a sec, guys. I want the audience to understand, I do material forensics for a living. I work with inorganic materials, mostly concrete and rock, but the process of investigation is the same regardless if you're dealing with organic material, inorganic material, documents, whatever. And so I've been doing this for 40 plus years now, and I'm pretty good at it. So, I understand the process of investigation and what it takes to draw a definitive conclusion. And sometimes you don't have enough evidence, and therefore you have to say that. You have to be honest and say, look, I don't have an opinion because I don't have enough to get me there. And the issue that I run into is a lot of academics that are not from a hard science discipline like the field that I work in, who, if they don't have enough evidence to draw a definitive conclusion of authenticity, they say it must be fake. And it's like their fallback position is, well, it can't be true because I can't prove it. And it's so bad, and it's so unscientific. And I run into this time and time again. But I want people to understand that we do understand, we certainly respect, and we follow the process. And let's also be honest, okay? I want this story to be true. I want all of my research, my thesis, to be proven correct. Of course we do, right? But at the same time, if I could have published something probably 5 years ago, but I wasn't ready to do it because obviously I'm concerned about my reputation, but even more than myself, I need to make sure that this story is true and correct, because it has to be, but it's also so damn important that in the end, when it all does come out, people are just going to be astonished. That's why this book that I'm writing now is called The Greatest Templar Story Never Told. And when you see the final result that dovetails with the Sinclair Weems stuff, you're not going to believe it. It's just astonishing.
And along those lines, I've been fighting the mainstream quite a bit. And I'm sure you're aware of the castle that was supposedly built up at New Ross, that story.
Did you see our episode?
I have 4 images of that now, that all those images were created by people who didn't even know the people that created the other ones or about their image, and yet they're all similar. But there's the opinion of record on it, unfortunately, was written by a kid in college, an undergrad, to get grades on a paper. Without the research, there's blatant mistakes in it and omissions in it, and yet I've seen that used on 3 different websites as as the truth about it. And
As the
it's so
source,
sad
right?
because
Yeah.
it literally drove Joan Harris and Ron out of Nova Scotia because people were coming down on them so bad because now Joan may have hurt herself with some miscellaneous subject matter that she talked to, but I talked directly to John Noss, who was the Mi'kmaq that told them that was built in 1623. And he was tasked with being the keeper of the oral traditions by his great grandfather, who was a Mi'kmaq, who was the oral tradition
Right.
keeper. And so you go and you read her stuff, and she's saying this isn't in the charter, but it is in the charter. She just didn't read down far enough on the charter. So and also there's another issue that I was told the expert in Nova Scotia by Doug Kroll, and I talked to her. She argued and argued and argued, and I gave her absolute black and white. I said, then explain this. And she said, I can't. So, but rather than listen to all my data and say, yeah, there's a possibility, she said, no, but I can't explain that. So I know what you're talking about. And I'm not trying to diss them. What I found, maybe you found this too, but the people at the top are the ones that are reluctant to change their mind. But the people down below them, like the staff in museums and stuff, they'll answer in a day. They'll send you, 10 times what you ever expected in a day because they don't have a role to protect.
A horse in the race, right?
Yeah.
Or their reputation that they're trying to defend.
Yeah.
And it's weird because in true scientific method, let's say, Doc, you had a theory that wine is bad for you, right? And then you publish it and you become famous, or you're known for this. And then James, a few years later, you perform a new study, you get new data, and guess what? Wine is not good for you, right? So what do, Doc? A lot of these academics, when they're faced with somebody challenging their work, they take it personally, right? But if they were true scientists, if Jim brings in new data that you didn't have, that supported a different conclusion, as a scientist, Doc, you don't become emotionally vested. You don't become territorial. You say, hey, you know what, Jim? I didn't have that information before. Good for you. I accept it. And you know what? When you do that, Doc, it doesn't mean you're stupid or that you were wrong.
No,
it means you're smart. And well, of course. I mean, if new data comes in, that happened one time in my career. And there was a catastrophic failure, a parking ramp collapse, or a couple of people that were killed. And there was a young guy that was on site that worked for the testing firm, and it had to do with whether or not it was below freezing or not when this failure happened. And I was given samples, and I came up with a conclusion, and I said that material had set up. It was already hard. And the young technician, we went and we played pool, and we had a couple of beers, and he said, Scott, he goes, I don't think that's right. And I wrote a report. I was the geologist of record, right? And remember, a couple of people died on this project. And so there were lawsuits and everything else, and everything hinged on, was the grout set or was it still plastic? And obviously cool temperatures would slow it down. And I said, what makes you say that? And he said, I'm just telling you, it was sleeting. I don't think it's set up. And I said, okay, then you guys go back in the evidence room. I want more samples, and let's take another look. And I'll be damned. They took another sample. There was a piece of grout that had been pushed when the failure happened. It pushed the still plastic grout into an air void, and you could see how it plastically deformed. That meant it had not set up. I was wrong.
Oh, yeah.
He was right. I wrote a new report, and I said, based on this new evidence, that it was plastic, and that shifted the blame to somebody else. The point is, I could have blown him off. I could have stood by it and not be challenged, right? But it's not about me being right. It's about getting the right answer. That's always the most important thing. So there you go. That's my rant for the day.
On the bottom of my notes for today, I have developing story for us. And that's what we're all talking about, is that we're bringing in new information constantly. And if you go back and look at our video with Laird Niven, I asked him point blank, Laird, why are not the Knights Baronet and the Masons from the 1600s being discussed in your history of Nova Scotia? And he did not have an answer. It's a donut hole. It's this, what you and Jim and I are all talking about is not in the records of the day-to-day life of Nova Scotians.
Yeah. Well, you know, the other thing you have to understand is that in Freemasonry, nowadays, a lot of the stuff that we do are, you know, our signs of recognition, our passwords, our penal signs, our handshakes. You know, if you want to look that stuff up, just Google it. Okay. It's all out there. But what we say in the craft is, look, if you can't keep simple stuff like those things a secret, then how can we trust you with anything important? The point is, a lot of the stuff that we do is purely symbolic, right? And
right.
But you go back to these days in the 1600s, the 1700s, and going back all the way to the Templars and beyond, you had to know who your enemies were and who your friends were. So these signs of recognition were literally a matter of life and death.
Yep.
It was a different time. The context was different. And so they kept that stuff extremely quiet. And that's part of the reason why this history is not documented, because frankly, the orders at that time didn't want it documented. They kept it very quiet. They didn't want people to know who they were. So these signs of recognition were very important, and they're very subtle. And, you know, even to this day, we have certain, you know, things that we'll say that will, you know, if you're a brother, you're going to know that he said something to you, then you have to give the proper response. Then you go through the other things to identify each other. But back then, man, it was, you know, if you outed yourself to the wrong person, you would literally be dead.
Oh, that letter that it was had the bomb threat, the vague
oh yeah, the
veiled threat inside of another letter that was like, you better watch yourself type thing.
Veiled? I don't know.
I know it. I try to use that word loosely.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Well, you know, without getting into too much detail, you know, Don worked for a company, a private security company is what he wants me to call it, that was hired by our military to do certain things that help keep us all safe. I guess that's the best way that I can couch it. And so this company was founded in 1961, and Don was one of the initial stockholders. Bill Jackson was served in the Korean War, and when he came back, he was looking for a job. So Don got him a job, and they worked together in this agency. Dan Spartan was the one that founded the company and was the main contact with the military people that would give him these missions to do. And so that's how that came about. Dan Spartan is one of the smartest guys I've never met. I corresponded with him for about 5 years, and he would write to me, and then I would get a message to Don, and the information had to go through multiple sources to get to him because he was retired and did not want to be tracked down, and that didn't happen. So we tried. We couldn't. We realized quickly, and he wrote me a letter at one point. He said, "Stop trying because you're never going to find me. The man you knew as Dan Spartan died many years ago. So, you know, it's a one-way communication, and that's the way it's going to be." But he kept very close attention. He knew when, you know, Don was working with Zena, and actually Dan was helping the two of them at the time with information that he had, but he always held things back because he said he wasn't sure about Zena, and it turns out he was right. So after what happened, then Dan was very upset, and and then, you know, I had already been working with both of them for many years, but then in 2017 I stopped to see Don, and it was literally a week and a half after Rick Lagina had stopped to see him, and I think was it Doug Crowell, or I can't remember the other guy's name, but Don has a picture of him that you saw in the book. And they were looking to try to get more material from Don. And I'm just going to tell you the story because it's the truth. It's what happened. And I happened to be traveling through New York about a week and a half after Rick and Doug were there. And forgive me if it's not Doug, it's in the book. I just can't remember the name off the top of my head. But I stopped in to see Don just because I was passing through. And I remember I went in the kitchen to get some water, and I saw this picture of Rick and Don and Doug. And I'm like, I said, was Rick Lagina here? He said, yeah, he was just here a week and a half ago. And I said, what did he want? He said, well, he said, there's a contract over there from them. He said, you're in the TV business. You read it and you tell me what you think. They're not going to pay you anything, but you can come on the show for 15 minutes like Zena did, and it'll be great. And I said, well, how about if you sign mine? And so we signed an agreement that day. We've been working together ever since. So, and the brothers have tried to contact Don, and I would just say, stop. You're not going to get him to cooperate. With Don, integrity is more important than money. And he's proven it time and time again, because if you don't do things the right way, you're not going to get his cooperation. And Zena screwed him over, and they helped facilitate that. And that's just the truth of the matter. And I'm not happy about it. A lot of people are not happy about it. And that's the way it went. Now, during that visit when I was there, and this happened with the contract, Don handed me an envelope that he had just received. And it came from Bill Jackson's daughter, Melissa, who was living in Ireland at the time. She has since moved away. And in that was a letter that had been written by Bill Jackson in 1996. This is 18 years, well, no, it was 21 years later. Basically, it said, it was written to his daughter. And he said, Melissa, I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, these are going to go to you. And if anything, I want you to get these to Don Rue. And what it included were 2 additional maps, in addition to the 4 that have been published. And they were obviously written by the same person. And they show the location of where Templars put treasure. None of them are Oak Island. They are other locations. And there was a third thing that was inside of that envelope. And it was a page that turned out to be the first page, the original page of a document that was titled A Year We Remember, that talked about the voyage that started in the UK in 1177, led by Sir Ralph de Sudley, a group of 144 men and women in 6 ships with 6 Templar knights. And the first thing they did is they went to Denmark, where they got their navigator, a woman by the name of Altamara, who was actually indigenous in heritage, who obviously had come from North America. And she was the one that led them back to North America, to a place called the Temple of the Goddess, to recover scrolls that had been hidden there sometime before the 10th century. And they did that. Now, they were able to recover some of the scrolls. They didn't get them all, but they brought them back to Seborga, Italy. That's where Sir Ralph de Sudley's deposition was taken. One copy went to the church. Another copy went with the order of the temple. So those maps, well, that particular page called A Year We Remember was page 1 of this long narrative that detailed that trip. It was written in Theban. It was an encrypted message. And the only way that you could decode that document is, it turns out, with this page 1, because the cipher phrase was at the top. And Bill Jackson in 1994 had sold the rest of that document to the Vatican. Well, it turns out the page that he pulled out was the page that you need. And without that, what he sold to the Vatican was worthless. So Don and I eventually figured this out, and I'll never forget that because I said, this son of a bitch, he was so smart. He knew exactly what to do. He got the money. And of course, the Vatican would want this information, but it turns out they bought a worthless document. So
Without the
good on
cipher.
Bill. So that page we have. And again, we have published that page now because the story is documented, so it really doesn't matter. But at the time in 1996, it mattered a lot. And so what we realized at that point was that Bill had pulled out some of the most important parts of that document and given them to loved ones and to people that worked within the agency of that he worked for, because these people took blood oaths, and he knew that what he did was he gave these important parts of the document to these colleagues with strict instructions upon their deaths that this material would go to Don Rue. Now, there was a line of succession of other people, but Bill wrote in a subsequent letter that Don was the youngest of the Spartan personnel, that he would probably outlive everybody else. And that's exactly what's happened. And it's incredible because over the course of the last 7 years, 5 people have died. And the amount of material that has come forward that is not published will astound you. The only thing that we published is the Oak Island material because it was so damn much of it. But we did redact some of the detailed material that we felt the show would take advantage of. And I tried to contact them. I said, guys, we've got material that you want. I contacted the network, I contacted the brothers, and they just ignored us. So that's why that material is redacted, because I'm not going to give them millions of dollars worth of content for nothing. I'm not going to do it.
Well, real quickly, we're just going to put up on the screen. We won't read the thing, but this is the letter that you received. And for anybody that wants to freeze the screen when they're rewatching this, I believe it's the 3rd paragraph down, that right in the middle of talking to you about these documents, he explains how people are sometimes eliminated with a bomb, with a pipe bomb. Well, and he wasn't hiding what he would say. And then you also got this little document that shows how to build a bomb, to just confirm the fact that he knew how to build a bomb. So that must have been a little unsettling for you to receive that.
Well, to be honest with you, it wasn't. And because I had had a lot of correspondence with him before, the message that he was telling me was, look, my friend, my colleague who I had been through life and death situations with many times. And the reason I can say that is because during COVID, one of the things that happened is Don sent me over 500 pages of reports of their missions that they conducted for this company. And I can tell you that they went through a lot. Excuse me. And that's putting it mildly. So I understood what they had been through. I understood the bond that these guys had. I respect that bond. And I think Dan understood how much I respected not just Don, but him, Dan himself. And so in that letter, when he starts writing about how to build a car bomb, and then when the key is turned, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Investigation will have a hard time identifying Mr. Crispy. I live in Minnesota, so I knew who he was talking about.
You knew who you're talking about.
But to be honest with you guys, I took it a little bit as a compliment that he felt I was significant enough to make that threat to. But I also knew that, of course, I'm not going to do any of that BS that Zena did. So I had nothing to worry about. And then, of course, if you go on and read that letter, and then the next letter I got, he showered me with praise for how I was treating Don fairly. And, he was going to do everything he could to help us. And he did. And you will find that out in the future.
Scott, if I can get back to your book for a little bit, tell me if I got this right. You got the Cremona Journal here. That's
Cremona
real early
document.
stuff. And then you have the Sinclair Weems journals, and then there's the space. And I think that's where Jim and I fit in with our research, because, as I said, there's no talk about the Knights Baronet. There's no talking about the colonization of Nova Scotia, and yet it all goes together. Do I have
Right.
this right?
You do, but you're also missing out on one other pillar of information.
Okay, that's what we
Cremona
want to know.
document. We have the Sinclair Weems journals. We also have a whole host of other legitimate artifacts that fit into this story, like the Kensington runestone, like the Newport Tower,
Okay.
like the Spirit Pond runestone,
Okay.
the Narragansett runestone. There's all kinds of other stuff. The In Hoc Signo Vinci stone. There's another stone that my partner and colleague Haley Ramsey found with some other people, called the ABM stone, that's out in Rhode Island, that we haven't even talked about yet because we're still investigating it. But you have a whole host of mysterious artifacts that have been declared hoaxes, right? That are not hoaxes.
Right.
And keep in mind, guys, there are larger forces at work here. Most notably, the Roman Catholic Church, that has a vested interest in this story, as you can probably imagine. And they do not want this story to come out. They do not want things like the Kensington runestone and the Newport Tower to be found to be legitimate and date back to medieval times and be connected to the Templars and the effort to found this country, because it doesn't work well for them. It triggers a series of dominoes to fall that go to inconvenient places for them that absolutely have devastating consequences. So
I can add
keep
to
in mind that's going on.
I can add to that story right now, because the book that I'm working on is our research on the Knights of Malta, and I put out a little blurb about it was coming out, blah blah blah, and I got a text from I guess a higher up of the Knights of Malta saying, you need to talk to the top guy in Rome about this before you say it. And I said, no, I've written books for 22 years about hidden history. It's a history book. It's not your policies. It's not, your point of view. It's what I've discovered as history. And I've never had to ask anybody else in 22 years. So I'm not going to ask you, and I'm kind to him in the book. I'm very kind to him in the book. I don't tear anybody down, but it's still, again, I look at it strictly from the historic records. And, we pride ourselves a lot in primary source documents. And that's the one thing that I've got busted about, that you're not really looking at primary sources. You don't know, blah, blah, blah. But we are. We're looking at papal bull. We're looking at the King's Privy Council minutes. We're looking at letters from King James to William Alexander, whatever. Anytime we find a new primary source, we just jump up and down about it, and we go over and over it with a fine-tooth comb. What can we glean out of this thing? So, because you can have opinions about everything, but you can't have a primary source document about everything.
Yeah, right. Well, no, you bring up a good point, and that's why it's taken us so long to vet these materials, because there are some pretty serious questions that surround them. In the case of the Sinclair Weems journals, the biggest question is the person that brought them forward. So, they have a very sketchy reputation. And so, a lot of people immediately just jump off and they say, well, this is all bullshit and I'm not going to waste my time on it. But, and I could have done the same thing, but what was in there was just too important. And so we've spent all this time vetting them, and I think it was worthwhile. And, a lot of people have said, well, you want it to be true. Well, you're damn right I want it to be true. But I'm not going to make that claim until I feel like I've done enough background research. I vetted this to the point where I think I can I can say with certainty that we're dealing with legitimate information here. And it's absolutely critical that we do that, regardless of what my personal feelings are. I can tell you in the past, I have dealt with some controversial subject matter. I purchased artifacts and then I went about testing them. And if my testing had gone well, I would have benefited financially. Well, unfortunately for me, it didn't go well. I had to make a statement about the fact these things were all fake, and it cost me some money, but I feel good about the fact that I got to the bottom of it. And let me tell you something, guys, I'm going to call it the way I see it, whether it works in my favor or not. I've done that multiple times, and I'm not going to stop doing it now.
You know, we had a guest
Really?
on a while
Same way.
back. His name was Ted Erskine, and he'd been writing me for probably 3 years about his family's involvement from Mary Queen of Scots all the way to Nova Scotia. And there were very long emails. And when you're trying to do a million other things, you're like, you got it in the back of your mind and you're reading them a little sketchily in the beginning. But he was persistent, and Doc and I started finding out that everything he was telling us was true.
Yeah.
You know, and but we found it out on our own. We didn't just take what he told us and say, yeah, this is true. We
Right.
went in and searched it out. And I just love the fact that you can go online and download a PDF of a book from 1550 or something.
Isn't that fantastic?
I know. And
How did people do research, 30
know.
years ago? It's just
and that's a big thing about Joan Harris. She was spot on a lot of things, or she's very close to spot on. She just didn't have the final thing, but she didn't have the internet. She didn't have, I don't know where she was finding her stuff out, but I go back and read her stuff, what pertains to the castle, not everything else she might have got into. And I'm like, this is amazing that this elderly lady in Nowheresville, Nova Scotia, was able to figure this stuff out. And she was almost there. And then the sophomore come along and blew her out of the water, and she gave up on the whole thing and left. And, they used to call that area Charing Cross. They moved to Western Canada, and there's a little crossroads out there now called Charing Cross, just a stone's throw from where they lived. So I think they took it with them. I think they took the memory of it with them.
Oh, okay.
Hey, here's a little footnote, guys. Wait. I want to tell you something.
Go ahead.
Here's a little footnote. Last month we did Ted Erskine, right?
Yeah.
I'm reading your book, Scott. I'm doing the research on the genealogy and on all of our people. And guess what name keeps popping up in all that? Erskine.
Oh,
So
okay.
They come through the Sinclair line. They come through the Weems. So what Jim and I keep saying over and over again, every episode, it's all connected. All these people knew each other.
Yeah. Hey,
And the Sudley name, in one of my books, I tracked down how they left England under pressure, and they went up to Scotland, and they dropped the duh to Sudley. And the guy that was the head of the guilds in Edinburgh on the day that William Alexander's sons and his partner became the first recorded Freemasons ever was a Sudley, and his son became a Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia. So here we go back to this. We're calling it an elite conspiracy, a multi-generational elite conspiracy, because it's the same families. They're intermarried with each other, which, that's natural because they want to keep it all in. They want to keep it all together.
keep it
And
tight.
they're carrying on this legacy and tradition and possessions and this whole dream of America, type of situation. So
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great story. And I was going to make a point, and now I lost the point.
I'm sorry.
It was important. It'll come back to me. But oh, no, what I was going to tell you is in the book that I'm writing now, the Sinclair Weems journals, other than what I have in the book, have you guys read anything on these journals?
no.
Okay, well, you're going to be amazed. you're gonna absolutely crap yourself because they are unbelievable. One of the things I wanted to tell you, it just came back to me, is that there was a treasure at New Ross, but it was recovered. And we did an episode there in the well. And it turns out that well was there back then. There was a treasure put in there, but it was recovered. So they do talk about New Ross in the journals, and when these things come out, all I can say is you're going to be blown away. You're not going to believe it. It's that good, and it all ties in with all of these families, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
Scott, let me throw a name at you. We have in Jim's research a guy named help me, Jim. Strachan's first name, Alexander.
Alexander Strachan. Al Strachan.
So Jim, tell him that story because I want to. Yeah.
Well, some in the family say Strawn and others in the family say Strachan. So they argue amongst themselves how to say it. But Al Strachan's the guy that stole this big treasure in Scotland. But John Strachan owned the Nolan Cross lots from 1841 to 1857. During that period, his family was one of the original financiers of the Bank of Nova Scotia, which is now Scotiabank. And you go on a Google search and put in Scotiabank Strachan, and you'll find probably 20 Strachans in high-level positions all over the world. In addition, when at the turn of the century, when 1900 came along, all the underwriters of Scotiabank were financial institutions except one gentleman who was named John Strachan. So there's absolutely a connection, and the timing is perfect that if money, treasure was found, whatever, and I hate to say laundered, but they don't want to give it to the king or the tax man. Perfect thing to do is to form your own bank with it. So that's a sub-level theory, but when Captain McKinnon found that shipwreck within sight of Oak Island, he pulled off a bunch of silverware, and the handles of the silverware have the Strachan family shield on them. So, a lot of this, and I know you're experiencing it too, you got a whole bunch of pieces and they all look like they go together, but you just don't have the puzzle all put together yet. And that's what we do every show, every book. We had 10 more pieces this time and 10 more pieces this time. And so we're anxious to get it all put together. Of course, then what will we do with our lives afterwards?
Well, there'll be something else. I never run out of things to do. That's for sure. And I remember when I was, getting into middle age and I started realizing how much I didn't know. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to live long enough to read all the books I want to read and investigate the things I want to investigate. So what I've done is I've really dialed into, what I feel I can have the most impact on, what interests me, and frankly, what I think is the most important. And I want to go back for just a sec, Doc, to what you said, or James, what you said about, this story that we've got all these puzzle pieces and we don't quite know how they fit together. I would disagree with that. I definitely understand. We've got the outline done of the puzzle, if you will. We've got a bunch of these pieces that are all interconnecting. And frankly, I think we're at the point where the pieces now at the end are flying into place. We know what the picture is. We know what the story is, the overall story, but there's all kinds of different subtales and, stories here and there. But the general story, we know exactly what it is.
Agreed.
And it's an amazing story. And, one of the really critical components that I don't think people understand and appreciate enough, all this talk about the Templars, the Scottish, family clans, Freemasonry and all of that. But one of the things that was absolutely critical for this nation to be founded, frankly, and for this whole covenant to have been successful, was every time these earls would come over to and the Templars would come over to North America, they interacted with the indigenous people.
Right.
And they bonded through ritual and intermarriage. Correct. And basically when when Earl Henry came over, and this is all detailed in excruciating detail. I mean, it's amazing. they developed a deep spiritual bond with each other. And basically because the Templars were matriarchal, just like the indigenous people. They respected the feminine aspect of the Godhead and the wisdom that females bring. And this is not a small thing. This is a huge thing. This is the truth of the matter as to why the Templars were put down. It wasn't just that they had a lot of money, wealth, and power. What happened was the church finally figured out that the Templars weren't the good Catholics that they thought they were. Now, that didn't work well for them when it came to interacting with the Roman Church. But when they came over to North America and they interacted with the indigenous people, this lended itself perfectly. And it allowed them to develop a deep trust. And basically what the indigenous people said was, look, this gold and silver that's important to you, it's not important to us, but you are our brothers. So if you want us to protect and guard this stuff, we'll do it for you. And they did that for over 4 centuries.
Right.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because without them, this experiment may never have happened. And of course, look how we treated them, right?
Yeah.
Genocide. And I think it's really an important piece to this puzzle. It's also important for people to understand that the ritual that I'm talking about that they shared, natives practice Freemasonry just like we do. Their ritual is essentially the same. It's a death and resurrection ritual. The way they go about it is slightly different, but it's really the same ritual. And the lessons taught are the same. So this is how they were able to bond and develop this deep trust. And I just want people to understand that and how important it was. And really, if we're going to start patting people on the back, the Templars, the Freemasons, these families that eventually all work together to help found this nation we call the United States of America. We also need to acknowledge and thank the contributions of the indigenous people and that bond. How the hell do you think they got to Minnesota to place the Kensington runestone, right? They didn't fight their way to Kensington. They traveled with their brothers.
This way.
Well, and in our recent work, particularly with the Knights of Malta, the records that were kept by them said that it was the Mi'kmaq who, they used the word drive, the French word for drive, who drove them into Mahone Bay up to Gold River to see how deep it was.
Yeah.
And so, and then also the William Alexander Jr., who is the first recorded modern Freemason, he led the Knights Baronet in Nova Scotia, and the LeBlanc family, a good share of them anyway, believe that he fathered the first LeBlanc. And they did, one of them did DNA testing, and the majority of his DNA, now you'd think it'd be French because of that name, but the majority of his DNA was Scottish, and he actually matched DNA with about 12 Alexander men, which helps prove that story. They worked on the castle at New Ross, and the Noss family, John Noss and his family worked on that. So there's so much out there, and it's easy to dismiss. It's a lot harder to research it and try to get it down in some kind of form that the average person can understand. But somebody can just wave their hands and say that's all BS, like you said, and where does it go, you know?
Well, that's easy to do, and that doesn't require any effort, right?
Right.
You can dismiss something and poo-poo something, but that doesn't push the ball down the field. That doesn't advance the mission of trying to get to the truth. And you know, when I run into, I don't even waste my time with the skeptics anymore. You know, if you're going to help solve the problem, let's do some work. And anyone can be a critic. That's easy. You know.
Gentlemen, my job is host, and I have to tell you, we got 2 minutes left. So, Scott, we want to thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Jim, let's give him the final wrap up, and then we're going to have to say goodbye. So, Scott, you got the floor.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure what I should wrap on and talk about, but I think I encourage people to pick up the new book, The Oak Island Knights Templar. and the Holy Grail, Secrets of the Underground Project Revealed. Some people have been really upset with the redacted material, but I think you guys understand what we're trying to do. The main points that are important for people to know are in the book, right? When was the treasure put there? When was it recovered? And, what are some of the details surrounding that? And I tried to include as much as I could, but like I said, I'm not going to give away free content. This TV is a business, right? It's about making money first and foremost. That's it. And truth and, all that other good stuff. If you can work that in, that's great, but it's a business. And I speak from, somebody who hosted TV shows in the past. I know what I'm talking about. And so always view things with a skeptical point of view. And, we'll see where all this stuff goes. But I do have a new book that I'm working on. It's just about done. It's about the Sinclair Weems journals. And then after that, we're going to publish the big book on the Cremona document with everything. And all I can tell you is buckle up, because it's going to be one hell of a wild ride.
All right. Well, thank you
Jim,
for being with us, and we look forward to your work.
Yeah. We'll keep you posted, guys. You want to do it again, just let me know.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. That's all I got to say is Scott shared things with us that it was like a hand in a glove.
Yeah.
So much of what we talked about in the last 15 episodes, there it was, and more. He really kind of brought things together. And you were right earlier when you said he's kind of opinionated. He is got strong opinions, that's for sure. But you do too.
Yeah. And they don't always match. I mean, nobody's, always agreeing with someone else.
Right.
But we wanted to present him as natural as we could.
He was very open with us.
It does no good if we have an interview with somebody and then we edit out the parts we don't like. That's not any kind of real research. So we've left pretty much everything in. The reader or the viewer can make their own decision on it. And but anyway, it was an excellent interview.
I think Scott made the distinction of Hollywood and good research. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And I think that's where it all boils down to. And I think we've talked about that as well. There's entertainment, and then there's research, historical stuff. And we've worked so hard at keeping things, as you often say, primary sources, documentation. And Scott seems to be doing the same thing, especially with those journals and the Cremona files and so forth.
Yeah, and it's a big web. It's been that way for me, then it became that way for us, especially like on the Knights of Malta show we did. That just branched out like crazy. I actually have a book about ready to come out based on that research and a little bit more. It's called Oak Island and Knights of Malta, original title. That'll be out in a week or so. But anyway, we certainly want to thank Scott, and we want to thank everybody that tunes into these shows, because it's just our goal to just reveal what we can of hidden history. Again, we use as many primary source documents as we can, and we just do the best we can. And it's there for you to decide if you like it or not.
Right. And I think we've found a new friend with Scott, and he has agreed that down the road, if we want to get together again, he'd be happy to join us. And I think we've got a lot in common. So we'll keep that door open, right?
Okay.
Well, I think that ends another episode, Jim, and congratulations on your new book. And we want to thank the folks here at Innovation Studios, as always. And we'll see you next time. I'm Doc Hamels, and
Jim McQuiston. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Take care.
This is Robert Clotworthy, and you have been listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Be sure to catch every episode.